We call the Free City College Oversight Committee meeting to order. And if we could have a roll call. By the way, I'm taking over for Eileen for the first half of the meeting, and then we're going to switch off.
With just a few announcements. First, I just want to acknowledge that we got the agenda out late. That was and we'll have a better process moving forward to get that. And just a few announcements before we do roll call. Since the COVID-19 health emergency, Free City College Oversight Committee members and the public participate in these meetings. And employees will attend the meeting through video conference, and
Jay, I think we're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I thought it was me.
Yeah, no, your sound is coming in and out.
Okay.
Jasmine, can you take over with the rest of that?
Yes. Okay, let's go.
Hear me better. This.
1 second. You were
Yes.
going. Okay,
much better, Jay.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll just use this from here on out.
Okay.
So committee members and employees will attend the meeting through video conference and participate in the meeting to the same extent as if they were physically present. For all members and employees participating in the Zoom meeting, we ask that you mute yourselves when you're not speaking. This will help reduce background noise. When you would like to speak, please select raise hand and wait to be introduced. Please remember to unmute yourself before you speak. Public comment will be available for each item on this agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 2 minutes to speak. Comments or opportunities to speak during the public comment period are available via Zoom and by phone. For Zoom users, from your screen, select raise hand and wait to be introduced. For phone user who called in, press *9 to raise your hand on the phone and wait to be introduced. You will be added to the queue to speak. Please wait until it is your turn to speak. When it's time for you to speak, you will be brought into the conversation by the Zoom administrator. Please state your name, and of course, you have the right to remain anonymous if you choose. You will have the standard 2 minutes to provide your comments. For Zoom users, there will be a timer on the screen. For phone users, we will give you a prompt that sounds like this. Anthony.
Sorry, I usually don't share the screen. This is why, because I have to do all of them.
Oh, okay. Well, you will get a sound and you will have 30 seconds remaining. While you are waiting, you will be able to watch and listen to the meeting. From the phone, the system will notify you when you are in line and waiting. All callers will remain on mute until their line is open. All speakers, please account for the time delays and speaking discrepancies between live coverage and streaming. Best practices are to call from a quiet location, speak clearly and loudly, and turn down any television or radio background sounds. This meeting will be recorded and posted on DCYF's website. So the first item on the agenda is call to order and roll call. So members, please unmute yourself. So first is Eileen Mariano. She's told us she'd be late. Bridget Davila.
Present.
Nikki Hatfield. Win Monkey.
Present.
Angelica Campos. Supervisor Gordon Marr.
Supervisor Marr's representative will be joining soon.
Okay. Joanna Fate. Alvin Kwok.
Present.
Maria Sue.
Present.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins.
Thank you.
Present.
Alyssa Messer.
Present.
Christopher Brody. Member Wu, Tyler Wu, has told us he won't be able to make it today. Connie Ford,
I'm here.
Malinali Villalobos.
Present.
We have quorum. Chair Davila, we have quorum. Did we lose?
Well, I'm
Thank you, Ron.
Let's get started on the adoption of the agenda. If you could please take a minute to review. Are there any committee member questions on this item? Or public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda?
I move to,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Connie.
I was just gonna move to approve the agenda.
Okay,
And I will second.
okay.
Member
So Connie
Ford's.
Ford moved and Maria Sue seconded.
And we'll take a roll call vote. This is a roll call vote to approve the adoption of the agenda. Chair Mariano, Chair Davila,
Yes.
Hatfield, Winmon Key,
Yeah.
Angelica Campos, Supervisor Gordon Marr, Joanna Fate, Calvin Kwok,
Yes.
Maria Sue,
Yes,
Lisa Cooper Wilkins,
Yes.
Alyssa Messer,
Yes.
Christopher Brody, Tyler Wu, Connie Ford,
Yes.
and Malinali Villalobos.
Yes.
Motion passes. There were 8 yeses.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is item 3, general public comment. Can you see if there are any other public commenters on the agenda?
Okay, just a few notes. Members of the public may address the Free City College Oversight Committee on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Oversight Committee. With respect to agenda items, members of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes at the time such item is called. Is there any public comment for items not listed on the agenda?
There's no public comment.
Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Okay. So now we're on item 4, resolution to allow teleconference meetings under CA Government Code Section 54953E.
Under the mayor's July 31st, 2020 order, policy bodies may meet remotely without advance approval from the mayor or the board of supervisors, but beginning October 1st, 2021, policy bodies must regularly adopt findings to continue holding remote meetings. Under normal circumstances, the Brown Act imposes special requirements for remote meetings, including requirements to provide special notice to the public and to allow members of the public to attend each teleconference location and observe each policy body member at the location calling into the meeting. AB 361 suspends those requirements if the governor has proclaimed a state emergency, provided the policy body makes certain findings, specifically to invoke AB 361's provisions. So long as the governor's emergency proclamation remains in effect, a policy body must make 2 findings at least once every 30 days. 1, it has considered or reconsidered the circumstances of the state of the emergency, and either 2A, the state of the emergency continues to directly impact the ability of policy body members to meet safely in person, or 2B, state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. Are there any committee members' questions on this item? Are there any public comments? Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
There are no speakers in the queue.
Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed.
Okay, thank you. This is going rather quickly. Is there a motion for adoption of the resolution?
So moved.
Has made the motion, and do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now we got a whole bunch. I heard Connie first, so
It doesn't matter.
Okay, we'll take a vote to approve the adoption of the resolution. Eileen Mariano, Bridget Davila,
yes.
Nikki Hatfield, Winmon Key.
Yeah.
Angelica Campos, Gordon Marr, Joanna Fate,
Yep.
Alvin Kwok,
Yes.
Maria Sue,
Yes.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins,
Yes. Thank you.
Alyssa Messer,
Yes.
Christopher Brody, Taylor Wu, Connie Ford,
Yes.
and Molinale Villalobos.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay, great. Item number 5, review and approval of the May 2022 minutes. So the next item is approving the minutes, and if you want to take a minute to review them, if you need to, or if anybody has any questions or public comment on the minutes. Are there any public commenters in the queue?
There are no public comment.
Okay.
Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Do any of the members of the committee have a comment? All right, well, is there a motion for approval of the May 2022 minutes? Now, don't everybody speak up at once.
I approve the minutes. It's Maria.
Okay, great, thank you. And do we have a second?
I second.
So we'll take a,
Joanna. Okay, thank you.
thank you. We'll take a vote to approve the adoption of minutes. Eileen Mariano, Bridget Davila,
Yes.
Nikki Hatfield, Winmon Key, Angelica Campos, Gordon Marr, Joanna Fate,
Yes.
Calvin Kwok,
Yes.
Maria Sue,
Yes.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins,
Yes.
Alyssa Messer,
Abstain.
Christopher Brody, Taylor Wu, Connie Ford,
Yes.
Molinale Villalobos.
Abstain.
The motion actually does not pass. Do we need a minute to review or have other comments from the committee on the minutes?
Why don't we go back to that? Oh, it looks like, yes, student trustee Villalobos.
Yes, I was not present at the last meeting, so that's why I abstained. I have no comment.
I believe that even if you are not present, you can still vote in the positive. If you choose to.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Or we can subtract the abstentions from the total count so that
Okay.
they don't cause the imbalance on the vote.
Okay, thank you. In that case, then the motion does pass.
Okay. All right, moving right along then. We have the item 6, Free City College audit review presentation. So that is going to be led by Aaron Cohen and Mark Maracchini from Crow. And this is to share the audit findings from academic year 2021 which was year 2 of the Free City program. Are Aaron and Mark here? I see Mark. And is Aaron here? Okay, great.
Yes, Aaron's here.
So why don't you begin your presentation when you're ready, and then we'll call for questions from the committee.
Can't hear you, Mark.
Is Mark or Aaron?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you now, Mark. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Again, this is Mark Marasini, a partner on the audit. First off, I would like to thank everyone from the committee for allowing us this time to present the results for this audit. This is the annual performance audit of the Free City College program on behalf of the City and County of San Francisco Office of the Controller, City Services Auditor. And as we mentioned, this audit is an annual audit. The audit period for this audit was August 1st, 2020 through July 1st, 2021. There will be a year 3 audit that will occur in the near future. But again, today we're presenting the results of the year 2 performance audit. So we wanted to cover with you here the audit objectives, the audit findings, and then the results of the non-audit procedures, and then open to the floor for any questions that you may have. Again, the non-audit procedures, just to remind everyone what those are. We had specific audit objectives that we covered that were part of the audit report, in the sense that we provided a conclusion on those objectives, and they were anchored with criteria related to the program. But then we also had some procedures that the city asked us to perform related to just the overall performance of the program, or just getting some additional information related to funding around the program. And those were the non-audit procedures, and Aaron will go into those in a little bit more detail a little later on in this presentation. So moving on to the audit objectives. We had 3 main audit objectives for this audit. And these are the same objectives as year 1, so they may look familiar. The first one was to determine whether program funds were used in accordance with the MOU and the administrative code. The second was to determine whether unspent funds were returned to the program fund, again, in accordance with the MOU and administrative code. And the third one was to determine whether the city college had reasonable controls over financial and operational activities of the program fund and the Free City College program. So just a high level summary of that. We did have findings related to objective 1 and objective 3, which are summarized in this presentation. However, I will note that objectives 1 and 2 were met in all significant respects. So we had no significant findings for either objective 1 or objective 2. So even though we had a finding with objective 1, it was not deemed significant to the overall program. So moving on now to the actual findings. We had 2 audit findings this year. The first one was related to the methodology for allocating administrative salaries and benefits to the Free City College Program Fund. In total, we noted that payroll expenses were $595,895. But this finding and the recommendation is not stating that that $595,000 was not allowable. What this finding is asking is for additional support for the allocation methodology that was used to support the allocations of those administrative salaries and benefits to the Free City program. We noted that the methodology that's currently being used was before the fact, at the beginning of the program year, and there was not a after the fact reconciliation time study or other means to support the actual specific percentages that were used. The second item is noted to the timing or the number of meetings that the Oversight Committee had during the audit period. The committee met less than every 4 months, which did not comply with the MOU. Again, this second finding was not deemed a significant finding. I wanted to cover one more item and then I could open up if there's any questions on the findings, but I did want to also discuss the status of the year 1 findings, which is on the next slide there. As you can see in the prior year or year 1 of the audit, we had 5 findings. It's good to note that 3 of those were remediated. So this year we only had 2. And as you can see here, 1 of those was only partially repeated. So it was partially remediated. So wanted to say that, you know, the City College has taken strides and efforts to remediate and make improvements for areas that were noted in the year 1 audit. I would also want to note that due to the timing, there were, to get these audits kicked off, year 1 audit had a little bit of lag after the audit period. So a lot of these items that were presented were well into year 2. So some of these items in year 2 cannot be fully remediated because the City College was already halfway, if not further, through that year. So I did want to point that out. I will pause here and ask if anybody has any questions on the objectives or any of the findings that we had this year. If
I was
not,
just,
can
you hear me?
yes, we could hear you.
Okay. I had a question on number 4, the partially remediated. That was partially remediated in the first year audit, correct?
So it was a finding in the first year audit, and then here in year 2, it was partially remediated. So part of the finding was removed, but part of the finding did remain.
Okay. And what do we need to do to remediate it entirely?
Yeah, so that would be implementing additional controls over the process to allocate those costs, specifically looking at after the fact mechanisms to support that the allocations were accurate. So when we look at how things are allocated to the program, it's fine to have estimates up front, you know, based on a budget or based on expectations of how things should be allocated, but then we would expect to see some ongoing or after the fact verification that this was accurate. So that could either be, obviously the most effective method would be taking physical timesheets, right? But sometimes that's an administrative burden, but other after the fact mechanisms would be sending information to the employees or their supervisors to confirm that this is actually how the time was spent for the year, doing a various spot checks of employees to see that they are spending this amount of time on the program. We go into a little bit of detail in the recommendation in the report, but those would be some of the ways that could help verify that the estimates that were originally used are accurate.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments while we pause here?
There's a hand up, Member Messer.
Okay.
Thanks. So I just following up again on President Davila's question around number 4. Since this is a continued finding, am I understanding? I'm just trying to understand it a little bit better. There's a differentiation between payroll expenses more generally, and particularly that last sentence about the allocations for executive level positions. Is there something particular about that piece that you can help us understand?
So that was actually part of the prior year finding that went away this year.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yep. Good. I like that.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, why don't you move forward then?
Yes, I'd like to hand it over to Aaron to discuss the non-audit procedures and results of those procedures. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark. So as Mark mentioned, we had 4 non-audit procedures that we looked at. The first being preparing a cost analysis to determine sustainability of the program. Non-audit procedure 2 to calculate a percentage of the total budget for tuition, grants, and other costs. Item 3 is to assess DCYS management and monitoring of the MOU, make recommendations for improvement. And then item 4 is to determine how much revenue is generated to the college from the Free City program. Next slide. So the results of non-audit procedure 1 show that the program is in good financial health. It's sustainable. The key piece here is to note that the fund balance is growing. As you can see, the costs over the last couple of years have been around 10 million. That we expect that to continue around 10 million unless enrollment significantly increases. Those primarily, all of those costs are tuition or grants related, and so the key takeaway here is that the fund balance is above 50%, and that needs to be addressed. So procedure 2 here, we're just taking a look at the total breakdown of costs. And so as you see, tuition at 36%, grants at 25%, then administrative expenditures at 4%. Again, that fund balance at 36% is fairly high year over year, but is an indication of lower enrollment than I think anticipated when the budgets year to year were created for this program. Next. So non-audit procedure 3, this really hasn't changed much year over year. As Mark mentioned, the timing of year 1 flowed into year 2. So you'll see some similarities here. And I'll highlight a couple. I think that the methodology around the administrative salary still needs to be addressed, as you can see from the continued finding. Making it more clear what administrative expenses should be included or should not be included, potentially putting a cap on administrative expenses. I think one other piece here that's important is the IT support costs that were included in year 1 that we mentioned needed some methodology. The MOU has some categories that could be included. City College removed all of those from this year's expenses, but I think if the MOU is more clear what could be included, then there is a potential for using some of these funds to help support those IT costs that are supporting the program. So I think that's something that City College and DCYF should look into going forward. And so this one actually changed a little bit from last year. This is the city asked us to determine how much revenue is generated to the Free City program. And so our understanding is that effectively, the Free City program doesn't create it has no impact on revenue. The Free City program funds are really an offset to the budget or general apportionment that the City College receives from the state. And so our recommendation here is to look at the intent of the program and determine if it truly was to supplement revenue. And we only say that based on the ask of how much revenue did it create. We would think that the intent may be to supplement some of that revenue. And so look at the intent and see if the mechanism of funding needs to change to ultimately supplement instead of offset the budget. Questions?
I have a question.
Councillor Martin?
Oh,
Sorry. Do you want to press your raise hand, Connie?
yes, I do.
Next
Thank
in
you.
the
Sorry.
queue.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair Davila, and good afternoon, committee. I wanted to just provide some comments and some context on the audit finding that was partially implemented. City College appreciates and welcomes opportunities to strengthen our internal controls. And right now we're actively putting in a process for time and effort reports. So our employees who are charged to the grant can retroactively review those charges and verify that that is reflective of actual time spent on the Free City program. So we are implementing and strengthening our controls and look forward to providing evidence of that in the next audit. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Connie Ford.
Yes, I just want to clarify that in the first non-audit procedure number 1, it basically says at the bottom that it's projected that we will have $23 million in our fund that we're not spending. And if that's correct, I just want to make a note of that, because at the end of this agenda today, we're going to be talking about fees, and we've been talking about fees for a long time, and how we're going to spend them and when we're going to spend them. And if we have this money sitting there and we don't want more than 50% to be in it, that's not good budgeting. Then here is the source of the money that we could go after. It's just a comment. I just want us to notice $23 million is a hell of a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Sue?
Thank you, Chair Devla. Thank you to Crow for the audit as well. Connie, you're absolutely correct. And actually, Chancellor Martin did submit a memo to us that will be shared in the next item for a request for this body to review whether it is good practice or best practice for us to use the dollars to support the fees. So Chancellor, I know that you are very limited on time. I wonder, since we opened up the conversation a little bit, do you want to take this time to talk a little bit about your request, or can you stay until the next item is called?
Thank you for asking, Maria. I do believe I can stay throughout the next item, so please continue.
Does anybody else have their hand up now? Oh, Elisa.
I just wanted to surface the conversation. I think it's non-audit procedure, the last one, which is about the budget or the revenue generated. So this is very interesting because as I recall, the last conversation was very different, and about whether or not Free City is a program for City College's budget. And this idea that some of us have always maintained that this is primarily, not only, but primarily a financial aid program, that the money goes to students, not to City College. City College gets, some help to administer it, as well it should, but that this is really a student-focused mechanism and a financial aid program that supplements students' ability to access college. So it's interesting to see that shift. And also, of course, raises questions about how we want to think about the program and the extent to which the program can potentially increase enrollment at the college. But that first and foremost, this money goes directly to students. And that's always been the goal. This is money for students, money for students, money for students. And I remain really proud of that as something really truly worthwhile, even while, of course, City College definitely needs more funding and all of that good stuff. But this is really about students.
Thank you.
Can I just confirm that too? Yes, it is about students. And I think when the original question to our auditors was posed, it was under the hypothesis that if we provide this type of support to students, we will recruit more students. And so that's the revenue generating piece that came in. But what we are realizing is that maybe we should do both, is to figure out a way to recruit more students and figure out a way to keep our students so that they can actually complete whatever coursework or course load they're looking to complete. So I think that there's these two things that I think this body, especially for this coming year, have to really focus on and think about. And I look forward to having that conversation.
Fantastic. Okay. Do I see any other? Okay, Joanna, fight.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Thank you about that. Thanks for those comments about the student-centered. And I had a follow-up comment / question around this, because I know that dual enrollment students can really bring the higher FTES in terms of enrollment. And yet we are at a place where we have more students wanting to take dual enrollment, yet we're not able to provide them those courses. So I wonder how this could also impact increasing dual enrollment and being able to then provide more revenue to the college.
Okay. I'm looking for more comments and questions, or if anybody wants to respond. All right. So I think you have all your questions there. Oh, I see student trustee Villalobos.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just to echo the feedback that has been shared, student focused and student centered is key. So as a student and student representative, I applaud you for these comments and for this work, making sure that students are at the root of this action or potential action.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, if you do, please put up your hand so I can see you. I'm scrolling through everybody right now. Okay, is there any public comment on this?
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
Speakers in the queue?
I see none. Public comment is closed.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this report. It was very enlightening, and I did love all the comments on it as well. And there's, this was for information, so if there's no other questions, we can move on to the City College update. Okay, let's do it. Item 7, City College update. So this is going to be led by Lisa Cooper Wilkins, and we're also inviting back the RP group for the first of a two-part presentation on details and outcomes of the project. Lisa, can you begin your update now?
President Davila, I wanted to inquire whether or not, while we had the Chancellor present, if he wanted to be able to speak to the memo requesting funding support, and then we could circle back.
Okay, that's great. Chancellor Martin, are you still here?
Yes, Chair Davila, thank you, Dr. Lisa Cooper Wilkins, for the presentation that we'll receive together here in just a moment. But I would like the opportunity to start the Free City or the City College update with an overview of a memorandum that was written to the DCYF on behalf of City College. And Dr. Cooper Wilkins, I believe that this may not be the specific memo. It's the memo from
Dr. Yes, I'm not sure that your memo is in the packet of materials. Hold on one second.
It is in there, and it should be the last item. And
got it. Great.
We put it up on this. Anthony's put it up on the screen.
Perfect. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, this looks like a different memo, but we can go ahead and speak to or provide the framework as to the discussion for this afternoon. But on June 23rd of this year, our governing board of trustees here at City College unanimously approved an official request of DCYF and the city and county of San Francisco to consider using free city reserve funds for the purpose of alleviating current and ongoing student debt. For the last 2.5 years since the onset of the pandemic, the state chancellor's office has waived Title V requirements. Those are the requirements that govern local community colleges. Title V requirements have historically required and mandated community colleges to collect and withhold registration rights as well as rights to transcripts until student debts are paid. When the pandemic came upon us, the Chancellor's Office waived that Title V requirement. So for the last 2.5 years, community colleges were permitted to allow students to continue to enroll, to continue to access the institution, access their transcripts while having outstanding debt. This fall, the State Chancellor's Office has officially closed that exemption opportunity, And we are now required to collect all outstanding debt from our students in order for them to register into a class or to collect their transcript, as well as access other parts of the institution. So over the last 2.5 years, we've had several students engage in higher education, and ultimately based on the circumstances and the exemptions of the debt requirement, we did have students who accumulated debt and in some circumstances weren't aware that that debt was accumulating. We are at a point now where we have approximately 6 million of outstanding debt. This is debt that precedes the pandemic, but also includes many students who accumulated that debt during the pandemic. So in looking at moving forward and creating a fresh start program, the Governing Board of Trustees at City College thought it was a very proper request and appropriate use of the Free City Reserve Funds. Student debt, as we all know, is a significant barrier not only to accessing higher education, but ultimately sticks with individuals well after their time in higher education. So if there's an opportunity to eliminate barriers and to provide students a stronger platform into the workforce and onto their next educational journey, that is something that the Governing Board of Trustees thought would be a phenomenal use of the reserve funds for the students that are here today, as well as the students who are not here today because they cannot afford to pay off their student debt. So if we are able to utilize Free City Reserve Funds to offset student debt, that will open the door to hundreds of community members who are not able to access City College right now because we are legally required to disallow registration with students who have outstanding debt. So that, I hope, is summarized very succinctly in the memo in front of the committee this afternoon. I'd be happy to answer any questions before passing it off to my colleague, Dr. Cooper Wilkins, who will dive into the numbers here in just a bit, as well as the breakout of the approximate 6 million of outstanding student debt as it stands today. Thank you.
I will say one thing before you start, Dr. Lisa Cooper Wilkins. I was one of those students, and it was a very sneaky way that the debt, you didn't even know that you had the debt until you tried to enroll the next semester. So I think this is a very effective use of these funds that otherwise students might be barred from attending.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Dr. Cooper Wilkins, were you gonna start on your report?
I see someone has their hand up. Should I wait?
Oh, I did not even see you. Yes, Student Trustee Villalobos.
I don't know if this is the time for comment or should I wait after the presentation?
It's fine if it's on student, that if it's on the
Yes.
student tab. Yes.
Member,
Yes.
just so members know, we have an item after this one. This item is City College update. We were just giving the Chancellor an opportunity to share this ahead of time since we have him here. We're going to have actually a whole item for this discussion. It might be better to kind of save it for then while this item we can reserve for the City College update, if that's okay.
Student Trustee Villalobos, is that okay with you?
Yes, that's okay.
I just want to make sure in case you had to leave or something.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm happy to come and give an update regarding the Free City College program and provide some data around participation in that program. Also, information around financial aid metrics here at the college. Shortly after I finish my presentation, the RP group will come and provide a presentation, which is a combination of the technical and impact report that they've been in the process of compiling, and they came and gave us a preview of that at our last Oversight Committee meeting. Then we will have another short update from Dr. John Alamine that does give a significant breakdown of the student debt here at the college, and a profile of those students and the debt that they have accumulated. And finally, at the end of my presentation, I'm just going to suggest some important considerations that the Oversight Committee may have once they've heard all of this information. And certainly we'll have time for questions. So the first slide is about Free City program participation. And this is a set of data that the committee has requested. And so each semester I will be providing an update on program participation. So for the fall 2021 semester, the number of program participants when compared to last year does represent a tiny bit of a decrease in participation. Not entirely sure what the cause is for that decrease, but there is some. And even though there is a bit of a decrease, the number of billed units that students have is slightly, it's almost the same. So you would think that it would be slightly less, but the number of dropped units does increase significantly from this past fall semester from a year ago. And I think that might be worth exploring why there is such an increase there. When you look at spring 2022, there is a slight increase from last spring, very slight. But that the thing that is a significant change when you look at the amount of the Free City College repayment amount, because the moratorium on suspending students need to repay for units ended in fall 2021 and impacted students in 2022, you'll see a significant increase in the amount of repayment. Also, there is a significant increase in the total number of dropped units that students have in spring 2022. Finally, for summer 2022, again, what's encouraging is that there is an increased use of the Free City program. So the numbers are very encouraging in terms of the number of students that are participating. There is, though, an increase in the number of repayment, as is there an increase in the number of dropped units. So those are the things that really stood out in terms of the program participation report for this year. When you look at the next slide, which is related to enrollment metrics, again, you would anticipate the same in terms of the number of students. The enrollment that utilize the enrollment fee waiver was slightly less in the fall, as I said on the previous slide. And then for both spring and summer, there were increases in participation of the enrollment fee waiver. What you also notice is that there is a slight decrease in the number of grants that were paid. And I believe that we have perhaps students, because of the number of units they're dropping and those adjustments being made, that is partially why those grants also represent a lower figure from last year. You will also see that, again, there's an increase of the number of students who needed to drop or withdraw from classes, particularly in the spring and the summer semesters. It's true throughout the whole year that's represented here, that there is an increase in dropped units, and that there are fewer, actually a significant number of students who have 0 units earned, because there are more students who maybe have withdrew from all of their classes. But despite that, there is a slight increase in the number of full-time students who were enrolled in the program. So despite those changes, that we did have more participation overall by full-time students in the Free City program. And finally, the in terms of the financial aid metrics, you can see here the total number of students enrolled, the total number of students that applied for some form of financial aid. And this is the total number of students who received some type of financial aid, whether that was a Pell Grant, whether it was the former BOG fee waiver. But students in general at about the same rate are applying for financial aid. So this number doesn't change significantly from the number that was shared for the past academic year. In the next slide, if we go past this one. So the RP group, like I said, will be presenting shortly on the outcomes of the technical and impact reports that they've compiled, and they will share with us some of their final recommendations as we think about how we might consider specific strategies to close equity and opportunity gaps for students and establish some very specific equity goals and objectives for the program. So what I'm suggesting is they're going to try to do this report as expeditiously as they can, and that hopefully that tees up a deeper conversation that we can have in future meetings about how we might establish goals and objectives. And we may even want to, like I said, consider continuing our relationship with the RP group as we go through that process. But that's, again, I think a consideration we might entertain after we hear their report. We'll also hear from Dr. Alameen a bit more about our outstanding fees, our students' outstanding fees that will allow us to, again, circle back to the Chancellor's request for how we might consider using the Free City Fund Reserve. And at this point, I will entertain questions unless we want those to wait until after the RP group has had a chance to give their presentation.
Do you have any questions before the RP group gives their presentation?
So if not, then I'm pleased for my colleagues Priya Shaplot and Giovanni Sosa to come forward to give their presentation today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for inviting us back to share some of the work that we've been recently doing. My name is Priya Darshini Chaplot. I go by Priya. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm joined by my colleague Gio. Gio, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Gio Sosa. Delighted to be here with you again. I think the findings that we've uncovered will result in a lot of meaningful dialogue.
Great. So Gio and I are senior researchers with the RP Group. The RP Group is an organization for institutional researchers, planners, and those who work in institutional effectiveness at the California community colleges kind of across the state. And we do a lot of work to raise up issues of informing practice and policy through the use of rigorous examination of evidence, et cetera. And we're excited to share a little bit about what we've been learning over the last few months. So just to briefly go through, as Lisa mentioned, there is a pair, or there are a pair of reports. We have an equity impact report and its best friend, the technical report that kind of goes into the details of the analyses of the quantitative data, the participant data for students who benefited from Free City. And so what Gio and I are going to do today, in the interest of time and everybody's space for the variety of information you're all getting, is just give you the highlights, just give you the hits. And the reports go into much deeper context in those pieces as well. We'll be around for questions if you have any at the end, but maybe we can dive right in. So the why of the work that Gio and I were engaged in was last year, at the heels of the annual report that had come out from the 2019-2020 year, there was a recommendation around further exploring what areas of opportunity exist to enhance both Free Cities' impact as a program broadly, but also the possible opportunities to advance equitable outcomes for students that were participating in Free City. And so those were the two main goals that Gio and I centered in the work that we did. Go to the next slide, please. And what we actually did was a set of 4 activities. We analyzed data that we received from the college that included characteristics and outcomes for students that had participated in the Free City program over the last few years. We also had a couple of conversations with select personnel from the college that's centered on Free City, how it is experienced by students, and what else the college is prioritizing to see if there were bridges or opportunities between Free City and the rest of the work that the college is doing as well. We also looked at some previous artifacts, including previous annual reports, the equity plan at the college, the current priorities being set by the accreditation leadership. And so we looked at those artifacts as well. And then lastly, we did just a very cursory and high level look at other programs similar to Free City in the country, and what kinds of features offer opportunities for Free City and you all to consider to continue advancing Free City's implementation and impact. So if we move to the next slide, and Gio, I'd love to hand it to you.
All right,
So,
thank you, Priya. As you heard Priya describe earlier, part of our outputs here is in relation to the data set that was shared by your college's research and planning office. And so we'll spend the next few minutes talking about just that, some of the quantitative information that we gathered from a closer examination of that data set. Now, one of the key outcomes, I think maybe everyone here will agree, one of the key outcomes that we want for our students is for them to persist, for them to enroll, not just in that initial fall term, but on a continuous basis. And of course, in that effort of achieving that ed goal. And so one of the key outcomes that we looked at here was with respect to the monitoring the number, and maybe more to the point, the percentage of students that not only enrolled in fall, but continued their enrollment into the spring for any given academic year. And that's in fact what you're seeing here too, shown to you by Free City status. That is, among those that did not participate and those that did. Now you can see just by looking at this graphic with me that there's a clear difference between the two. As a participant in a program, students were much more likely to actually persist from one semester to the next. You see the average, if you just take the average of the lighter shaded bars, which are the Free City participants, you can see that's roughly in the upper 60s relative to those that do not or did not participate in Free City during this time period. It's more or less in the 50s, low 50s at that. So a clear difference between the two groups with respect to their likelihood of continuing to enroll in a college from one term to the next. Next slide. Here you have a snapshot of the average or mean number of units that were earned by each group. This probably is not surprising to you given what we just looked at with respect to persistence. We know just from the earlier slide that Free City students are more likely to re-enroll or continue their enrollment here at the college. And that, of course, aligns with what you're seeing here. Free City students are earning double the units of non-Free City students during that period between 16 and 21. Next slide. Now, of course, the question that comes with looking at these data is what that information would look like were we to disaggregate it by key demographic characteristics. And that's exactly what you're looking at here. In this case, with respect to that disaggregation by ethnicity and race. So one clear, or maybe obvious finding here tied to the earlier slide is a difference again across the board here between Free City and non-Free City. So across all of the groups that you see here, being in Free City increased the average number of units that each group earned. Another finding that may call your attention here is just not just the magnitude of that gap, but also the idea that some groups, in fact, really maximize the units that they earned. For instance, maybe with respect to Asian students and Filipino students, Hispanic students, averages of 27, 25, and 23, quite robust numbers, especially when you make that comparison to non-free city students. The one thing I will say is that one unintended consequence, and we'll talk more about equity in a moment, but one perhaps unintended consequence here is that in some cases, the program seems to be correlated with this idea of increasing gaps. And what I mean by that is if you look, for instance, Asian students versus Black African-American students, if you just look at the darker shaded bars, the non-free city participants, you see that gap of 12.6 versus 11.4. Look at that gap now among free city. That gap's actually widened. So both groups benefit, but it looks like Asian students are especially on the are maximizing those units that they're earning relative to Black African-American students. Next slide. And I apologize, I am going rather rapidly, I admit, but again, I'm realizing that time is of the essence here. And our reports, as Priya and Dr. Cooper have alluded to earlier, do get into all this detail and then some. Here you have the same outcome, mean or average units earned, in this case, disaggregated by age group. Again, the finding is very much in favor of those participating in free city, probably not surprising by this point in time here. What I do want to call attention to is specifically the younger groups. Look at the difference between non-free city and free city participants among particularly the 19 or younger group. Just a robust gap there, tripling the average number of units among those participating in free city. So if you see there's a gap all the way across the board, but particularly for the younger groups. So the younger groups seem to be benefiting the most by participating in free city, at least with respect to earning units. Next slide. Now there are still, the findings are most compelling, certainly, and they do speak to the benefits or the impacts of participating in free city. It does come with some limitations, and of course our reports get more into the nuance of this, but briefly, there are, and I think many of us will recognize, there are many other outcomes that we would have liked to have explored here. One is with respect to key milestones. That is maybe more specifically to the completion of translatable math or English. We did not receive that as part of the data set. And I understand that can be challenging in just acquiring those data, but that would be a great outcome to examine down the road in reference to the potential impact of free city participation. Award attainment, of course, is another one, I suppose, goes without saying. Looking at the impact of free city participation on the likelihood of earning a degree, a certificate. Another piece, and Priya will talk more about this in the subsequent portion here as we get into the recommendations, but the debt and receipt of financial aid. Given that free city, of course, is a program that offers monetary assistance, it would be useful to know what the relationship is between free city participation and, of course, financial aid access or use of financial aid resources. Program of studies, another great outcome to explore. It would be useful to know what the relationship is between free city participation and, again, program of study or even meta major, so that you can identify potential opportunities, in-reach and outreach opportunities to students that maybe aren't fully in those disciplines or in those programs of study that aren't fully taking advantage of the program. The other limitation is we do have 5 years worth of data, as you saw earlier. We don't have or know for any given student, at least in the data set that was provided to us, when they initially started at City College. Because we don't have a starting point, we couldn't tell you that we can't track them out over time, the two parties, in non-free city and the free city groups, to determine what the impacts were of free city right from day one and over an extended period of time. It's a very powerful analysis to be able to track those two parties and determine what those differential impacts might be. But again, having that start term would be critical to doing that kind of a cohort analysis, as it's often referred to. Next.
Thanks, Gio. So what Gio presented was some critical analyses we were able to conduct with the data set that we received. And to complement the quantitative data, we also facilitated a couple of conversations with some folks at the college, primarily leadership in student affairs, and then additional senior leadership that was working on accreditation efforts and also institutional effectiveness efforts. The next slides give you some of the highlights of the themes from those conversations. And those conversations, again, were really centered around what are the real experiences that students have that receive Free City. So it was centered in Free City, but it was still looking at the actual impact in the whole student experience related to Free City. And then we also asked the question to the college leadership about what are some of the other priorities that you're centering in your work as an institution? What are some of those institutional opportunities and priorities that could offer direction or amplification for Free City as a program? And so the first slide is really, oh, would you mind going back, please? Thank you. The first one, what we were learning from the conversations was the Free City as a support was received by the student differently than other supports at the institution, because it was done in the registration process and it was part of an affidavit, and it was separated from, say, other efforts to as part of onboarding, whether it's meeting with a counselor or engaging in an orientation or other types of kind of preparing for the college. That was a notable separation that showed up, in some of the recommendations we recommend. The second was this really interesting conversation student affairs folks shared about how adding a couple of tweaks to the affidavit actually changed the experience from the student's perspective. And there were some unintended impacts where students that were actually eligible misanswered certain questions because of the ways that they were phrased or the ways that they were positioned on a phone if a student was using a mobile phone. Those were corrected, but it did identify that even in the administration of the Free City benefit, we just want to make sure that students who are receiving it, students who are eligible for it are in fact receiving it. Again, there were varying exposures to Free City for students depending on how they entered and stayed in the institution. They were getting different pieces of information or frequency of information around Free City. And then lastly, as Gio talked a little bit, there is an opportunity and a need to make sure that data around Free City is also aligned with other data collection and tracking efforts at the institution. If we go to the next slide, this talks about what are some of the beyond Free City considerations and contextual pieces that might inform the way that we built out the recommendations. We also learned that there are plenty, this is the great news, there are plenty of supports out there at the college that can really help students address the full cost of college. They're out there. It's not about inventing new and different. Part of this opportunity, spoiler alert, is really about lifting up and making sure that the supports that are available are actually meeting students at the right place at the right time, or that folks that are supporting students like faculty and staff are actually aware of the supports that are available so that they can direct students to those types of services. So clearly the second bullet around navigating a high volume of resources by both students as well as faculty and staff came up in the conversations. And so there was a natural opportunity to build awareness and continue lifting up the work that is already being done by the institution to have more meaningful professional development around awareness building of resources and supports. And then, as Gio briefly mentioned, thinking about the relationship between Free City as a program to efforts like guided pathways. So Free City to what end? How do we know, for example, which meta majors or programs of study students who receive Free City benefits one semester, multiple semesters, what are they doing in terms of their educational goals and how far are they in progressing and completing those? Again, details of all of this are included in our report, so I'm going to jump right to the recommendations. Now, the recommendations are really, there are 5 of them. Only the first one is the one that Gio and I recommend doing first. Everything else you can kind of reorganize your priorities and use as necessary, but the first one is the one that we would really say happens first. And that is, as Lisa already mentioned earlier, it is to answer the question of what is the shared understanding of having program impact and advancing equity. And to that end, we really recommend articulating clear Free City program goals, including those centered on advancing equitable outcomes for students, to really determine the variety of ways you can say that Free City is impacting students. In the report, for each of these recommendations, we have this as the recommendation outcome, and then we offer some types of activities and strategies that you all can consider that might help contribute to advancing each of the recommendations. And then we also give some resources from a variety of institutions that could speak to some of those activities as well, just to give you some perspective of other colleges' examples, et cetera. So if we go forward, a couple of these examples might be to articulate outcomes and set clear goals that might be in conjunction with other institutional priorities at the college that might be aligned with their equity priorities or with priorities around student access, progress, completion, advancement. Another one, and Gio, I wonder if you would just spend a minute talking about the acknowledgement that IT and IR capacity at the college is limited.
Yes.
And needs to be able to build that in creative ways as well. So Gio.
Absolutely. Thank you, Priya, for that segue. And that's right. We do recognize it. And I work in this field. I work also at Crafton Hills College. I know that the challenges, the logistic among others, that have to do with being able to just support the different requests that are needed across the college. Now, in the spirit of acknowledging those limitations, we also recommend that the college seek out efficiencies, streams of efficiency that can work to still provide the college with meaningful, actionable data without overexerting that pressure on research staff and or IT staff in that realm. So to that end, there's the opportunity to use management information system data, or MIS data, that all of us across the system are required to submit to the state chancellor's office, because that data is as robust as it is. And because, of course, we have data in that system on a student by student basis, there's an opportunity there to simply merge those two different data sets, any Free City data like what was shared with us at the RP group, along with the existing MIS data, to streamline those efforts of examining those outcomes. So MIS data, as some of you know, fairly robust and has access to so much information. There's a wonderful opportunity to tap that as a great resource and to use it to get a handle on some of these outcomes, including some of the ones that Priya and I mentioned earlier, like program of study, like award attainment, like completion of translevel English and math.
Thanks, Gio. Next slide, please. The second recommendation comes straight from the analyses from the quantitative data. And so this also speaks to the first recommendation about articulating clear program goals. This piece is talking about identifying and increasing participation, progress, and completion among the student groups that are most disproportionately impacted. And Gio, I'm wondering if you'd like to.
Yeah, sure. I think we might have a graphic on the next slide that would help with this, if you don't mind. Thank you. So let me frame this before we even jump into the numbers that you're seeing here. And I think this is logic that many of you can relate to just in the work that you all do. If we find when looking at our data, in this case by race and ethnicity, that for instance, we find, for instance, I'm looking at our data here, 27% of our student population identifies as Asian, then we expect that when we look at the subpopulation, the Free City participants, that we will also find when looking at those data, that 20% of those Free City participants also identify as Asian. And so what we're doing here, and when we do these types of equity analysis, is we're looking to establish that the representation in the overall student body at the college is identical or close to identical in the subpopulation. That is, when we just look at Free City participants. And when we examine, and that's in fact the analysis that we did here, when we examine it, we found, for the most part, parity. So if we look again at Asian students, also true, largely true of Hispanic students, also true of white students. When we look at those two that those two percentages are really close. And in fact, when those percentages are identical, the resulting PI, proportionality index value, is 1, because it's just a ratio of the two numbers, 1 over the other. So if they're equivalent, that number will be 1. If that value you see here is above 1, what this reflects is a slight over-representation of that group in the Free City participants. If the number is below 1, what this is suggesting is an under-representation of that group among that subpopulation of Free City participants. And we see that under-representation for Black African American students and for Pacific Islander students. I'll focus just one example, African American students. So in our data set, they across the student body, they comprise roughly 7 to 8% of the student body, but far less, something more like 5% in the Free City population. And similarly, of course, wasn't covered for Pacific Islanders. So what this is saying is there's an opportunity here for outreach and in-reach efforts to those particular groups, Black African American students and Pacific Islander students, to increase that participation. We know from the earlier slides that participation in Free City is very much related to these great outcomes, units earned and persistence. There's a great opportunity here to connect with these student populations. Next slide. And we also, of course, looked at our data by age and by gender. Here you have data related to gender. So this, again, the same logic follows here. We're looking for a match between the representation in the student body and the representation in just the Free City subgroup or subpopulation. And we saw parity there with all groups with the exception of one, the 19 or younger group. Then we saw from earlier slides, the 19 or younger students seem to benefit incredibly by virtue of participating in Free City. We saw that with just the units. It's just staggering, the average number of units that participants earn relative to their non-participating peers. And yet, unfortunately, there's an opportunity here to increase that participation. We have fewer than expected 19 or younger students taking advantage of this program. Next.
Thanks, Gio.
Oh, feel free, Priya, to jump in with anything.
No problem. So to that end, some of the activities that we mentioned in the report are really looking at in-reach and outreach of different types of students and better understanding what their experiences are like engaging with the Free City program, not only in onboarding, but also as they continue. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to speed through the rest and invite any questions at the end. So if we go to the next recommendation, the third of 5 recommendations is really ensuring that those who are eligible for Free City receive Free City, not only in the beginning, but throughout their time at City College. And so the third recommendation is just to continue interrogating and examining the ways that are student facing, that are ensuring that students who are eligible are able to receive that assistance. Go to the next slide, The fourth one, I want to spend just a moment longer. The fourth one is really around acknowledging that Free City is not only an access strategy, but also a retention and completion strategy. And to that end, how can Free City have a stronger relationship with other supports that address the total cost of attendance? And I'm talking about supports that are both traditional in nature. So when you think of FAFSA and you think of federal and state grants, scholarships, loans, but I'd like to try to minimize the loans that students need to take in order to address their total cost of attendance. But this is also thinking broadly towards public benefits, towards community resources, towards other types of employment opportunities that can leverage the ability of each student's eligibility. And so recommendation 4 is really ensuring that in addition to students accessing Free City, there are intentional designs and opportunities to make sure that students can also maximize the other types of free money that they could get that sets them up to address costs beyond tuition and fees. And so in the strategies that we offer, one, for example, is about how do we do some kind of intake in the beginning that helps identify the circumstances of students that can really ensure that they are directed to the variety of supports. And there was one quick comment that was made in a recent meeting where somebody mentioned that some students see Free City as the assistance, that if they receive Free City, they don't necessarily apply for other types of aid. So I think there's an opportunity there around communication and clear expectation and understanding for students about the variety of supports that can really make sure that they can focus on their education and move forward in that area. If you wouldn't mind advancing 2 slides to recommendation 5, perfect. Last recommendation is, so much of what we talked about is really about onboarding and new and incoming students, but recommendation 5 really speaks to continuing students and making sure that continuing students continue to know about Free City and other types of student financial stability efforts that will ensure that throughout their 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th semesters towards whatever educational goal they have, that they are able to maximize the supports to ensure that they can continue to make progress. If we move forward, we can go one more. So really what we are, in the next meeting that you have, what Gio and I would encourage you all to think about is, what would meaningful, equity-centered, Free City outcomes, say that 5 times fast, look like in terms of the program's impact, but also realistically in the equitable experiences of students? What does that practically look like as an expression? And thinking about those features of Free City that you want to advance, how can those be connected, coordinated, integrated with other priorities at the institution around advancing equity and supporting students' retention and success outcomes? And then coming back to a lot that Gio mentioned, how can we ensure that for that understanding of impact, we have an intentional practice of collecting, analyzing, and monitoring data? And then again, I think we heard that at the top of the meeting when we came in, how can these inform the variety of ways that you can allocate resources to ensure that this capacity is built and supports the work? All right, back to you, Lisa.
Thank you very much. And I just want to make sure, because you referenced it multiple times, that we make sure that the Oversight Committee has the full final versions of both the impact and the technical report. And if that is not the case, we need to make sure that that occurs. And thank you for the set of guiding questions too, to help the Oversight Committee continue the conversation now that you've provided this presentation. So at this point, would we like Dr. Alamy to go through the overview of student debt, or are there specific questions for me or the RP group?
Okay, can we save the presentation for student debt on the next item? Because I think that's tied more to the fund use.
Absolutely. So if there are questions related to this presentation or the one that I gave earlier about program participation, I'm happy to entertain that.
Are there any questions? Oh, is that a hand up? Okay, go ahead. Lisa.
This is just, it's so fantastic and I'm overwhelmed and I want to spend hours reading. I haven't seen the reports yet, so I'm very excited to see these reports and to spend time with these slides and think through it. And I just know that I have a million questions and I'm not even going to try to approach them right now, but there's so much to think about and so much that's actionable here. So I guess I'm just wondering if we will have further opportunity to speak with you all and ask you questions in any kind of ongoing way, or is this sort of towards the end of your communication with this committee?
So I'm just going to jump in here and say that this was the extent to which we engaged the RP group to help us, at least on the front end, to think about potential, the ability for us to set up equity outcomes for the program. And so one of my suggestions is if the Oversight Committee would like to consider a continued relationship with RP group to help guide the discussion and for us to establish, I think, meaningful and measurable, outcomes, because, you can get excited at the beginning of formulating ideas about what we could do, but we also want them to help us to stay focused on the mission of Free City.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
This is Maria. I just want to say thank you to the RP group for sharing this data. This is fantastic. And I think along with Alyssa, I could barely contain myself. Part of it was just like, you all started the Free City College effort with this hypothesis that if we supported students would do better, and students would stay connected to the college, and students will be able to transition. And you're showing a slight glimmer of hope for proving that hypothesis to be correct. There's still lots of questions. Don't get me wrong. There's still lots and lots of questions. But this is really exciting, and it's a great first step for us to start thinking deeper around how do we use equity and use the frame of equity to focus our efforts and figuring out which students we are truly leaving behind, and which students, and why are those other students, why are our Asian students doing so well, and why is it that they're, where did they learn about the Free City thing? Like, how did they hear about it, and how did a bunch of other young people didn't? And like, there are so many different questions. So Dr. Cooper, I would love for us to figure out a way to continue this dialogue. I echo Member Messner's request for us to continue this conversation and be able to continue to dive deeper into understanding this data.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to reach out and request that we continue the relationship and bring back a proposal for what that would look like to the Oversight Committee. Absolutely.
I know we're a little pressed for time, I think, Jay, right? I did want to say, I was wondering, how much does immigration status affect whether a student ends up using Free City? Was that part of your analysis at all?
That's a great question. No, that wasn't part of the data set that we received, but I think that
was a big concern of the boards when it was first implemented.
That's a worthwhile endeavor. Absolutely.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on? All right, let's go ahead then. I think, does anybody, is there any public comment?
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
No speakers in the queue.
None. Public comment is closed.
Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, so public comment is closed.
I did see a hand raised by student trustee Lobos.
Oh, I don't see it raised, but go ahead.
I accidentally raised my hand, sorry.
Oh, okay. We're still waiting to hear from you on the debt, so, but we'll get back to that. Why don't we have Dr. Alamin come on? Was he going to give a report right now?
I think we're going to move to the next item, and he'll do the report in this next item.
Okay. And that is the
Item 8, discussion of Free City funds.
Yes, Free City funds. So this is a continuation of the last discussion. And Dr. Alamin, are you here now?
I am. Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for giving us a moment to talk about the use for our students. Some of the Free City fund balance to assist with creating opportunities for roughly about 14,000 students The quick synopsis for the sake of time is that we have 2 requests today. If you can scroll down to the last page, second page, before the attachment, just the summary right before. Essentially, we're asking for, okay, we can stay on this page, it's fine. We're asking your support for 2 things. We have roughly, give or take, slightly under $6 million in outstanding fees and charges that are due and that impact over roughly about 16,000 students who are currently restricted from enrolling because of, or would be without the current legislation in place, would be barred from enrolling. And in the future, this will serve as a barrier. So we were asking for consideration of the Free City Oversight Committee for $6 million from the reserve fund to help us wipe out this outstanding student debt. That was request number 1. Request number 2 is related to the audit finding that was presented to you earlier. While there are very specific positions that are located on page 2 of the memorandum, right above attachment 1, if we can go back to that page, please. These are the current number of positions that we have for 22-23, from administration through admissions and records, the bursar's office, the financial aid office, and informational technology services. These are the currents and what the auditor referred to as salary estimates or percentages. These are the percentages of the time, the full-time equivalent time, or FTE, which is associated with the time on task that these individuals spend for the Free City program. So to address the audit finding, we will begin this year doing time and effort reporting for each of these individuals, summarizing on at least a quarterly basis so that by mid-year, we know exactly how much time on task has been associated to the Free City program. And by taking 3rd and 4th quarter time and effort reports, we'll be able to functionally demonstrate the amount of time and the duties and the responsibilities that each of these individuals have to the Free City program, so that we then charge the appropriate amount of allotment for their salaries and benefits given the time that they've served. So our second request was for your approval of this current list of staffing assigned to the Free City program, and Dr. Cooper Wilkins and I would be available to respond and answer to any questions you may have, because all those staff report to her and my areas.
Are there any questions? Thought I saw one. Oh, there we go. Connie Ford.
Yes, thank you for this letter and summary. I have, as a community support person, been hoping that we would find something like this, because I understand from my relationship with a lot of students who actually go to City College and have been charged with the fees, how onerous they can be when they have to consider everything else in their lifestyle that they're paying for. I think the simplest question is the second one about how much would you project that this amount would be for the staff who have to help us administer it? So that's the second one. But the first one, this is a naive question because I really don't know. Is 6 million is a great number, and 16,000 students being able to attend City College who couldn't before because of the fees that they can't pay is fabulous. I'm just wondering what other kind of fees at the college students have that this amount of money is not covering. I guess who
that's a great question, and I think for the staff that are involved, these are the current staff who are assigned to the program. The cost, this time percentage is similar to what was allocated in the prior year, so it's give or take, I believe it's It's less than $600,000 a year. I believe it's more like mid 550 some odd dollars. I forget what the audited amount was, but it's roughly about the same amount of funding that was provided in prior year. So there's not a significant difference between the two. What we're going to try to do is once we reconcile all of the specific needs of the students for this program, then we'll be able to give you a concrete number of who the staff are, because we've had a number of staff that have changed from prior lists from when the program first started. But we're trying to make sure we have an established group of individuals who support this program so that we can not only demonstrate the work that they're doing, but document to the auditor's approval the legitimacy of each of these positions and their relevance to the program. So that's what we'll begin working on this year. The other item, if you go to attachment 1, please. And it's the second sheet after this, it's right after this page. Yes, if you'll look here, we have a number of fees. One, it's our enrollment fee, registration fees, there's student health center fees. There are a number of outstanding fees which students are assessed upon enrollment. These particular categories are for enrollment fees, free city program, out of state, other international capital outlay, non-health leave. It's also capital outlay, health fees outstanding. These basically cover all of the different student fees with the exception of fees that are associated with individual classes, use fee or other type of materials fee. These are all the fees for which we have outstanding student debt. So we've been inclusive of everything of all the categories that are currently outstanding.
So I'm sorry, can I just have one follow-up? So the 6 million that you have projected would cover all of this, what I'm looking at here, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. And then in terms of the other specific classroom fees, I'm thinking that maybe it has to do with some of the trade classes and their equipment or other kinds of fees. Is that correct?
Well, that we wouldn't keep track of, because if it was a material or supply related fee, that fee would have had to been paid by the student. It's not outside, and I won't say it's outside of our collection, but for all of the fees which we're required to collect, they're all reflected on this sheet.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you. This is something I've long been waiting for, and I appreciate this work.
I see Rebecca's hand and Maria's hand.
So what I wanted to clarify that in this report, there are some fees that were not included in here, such as the student activity fee, representation fee, and in addition, there could be materials fees for the art classes. Mostly that, they could be an additional amount. Now, I didn't calculate it in there, so I would have to go back and see whether there's any other fees that I have to look at for this particular students.
Thank you. Maria, did you have a?
Yeah, can I just ask for clarification? For the 6 million, this doesn't look like it's only free city college students. It looks like it's for your entire city college population that includes out of state and international students. Is that correct?
That is correct. It includes all CCSF students who have outstanding student debt, for which are reflected in these categories.
So then to the body, I understand that the 6 million will help with all fees for City College. I will remind everyone that the Free City College funds are general funds, they're city dollars. And so I don't think we would be able to use these dollars to cover state fees and definitely international fees. I would even be hesitant to even go outside of San Francisco. So I think we need to set some perimeters around this conversation about how much money we are talking about.
So can I ask another question? Going back to just the previous person, Rebecca, who said that she hadn't calculated all of the fees. If the fees that she hadn't applied to this chart that we're looking at are needed or are used by free college students, they should be included. Am I correct?
So the Free City program, yes, if they're gonna, if we're looking at all the outstanding fees that a Free City student, and in this case, these students in particular are the students that drop the courses after the deadline for a full refund, that we go back and put these charges on the student account. If in this pool of students, there are other fees that that would be paid because they're Free City students, then I would need to go back and revisit that and add them so that you guys can have a full picture.
Thank you.
Could I, Madam Chair, could I request that? For her to complete this Free City College fees that she didn't include in this particular report that affect Free City students? Yes. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay, sorry. Yes. Yes, that sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
Joanna?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question about the fees that are listed there, because for dual enrollment students, the 19 and under, we as SFUSD pay all these fees for them. So I'm wondering if these fees will be applied to Free City students, could they also, or the money be applied, would it also be applied to dual enrollment students? And then my other question too is currently we're at a point where we're having to pay for contract ed for all of our, or not all, for any additional dual enrollment courses. So is there something, because we're paying, about $20,000 per 3-credit course per course for dual enrollment. So wondering if this could also be impacted by these extra fees.
Let's see who wants to
I guess-
respond to that.
I guess what I'm hearing then is a desire to hear about all the fees that are associated with San Francisco residents only, whether they're Free City or not, because in the case of dual enrollment and these contract ed fees, then those would pertain just to City of San Francisco, as just highlighted by Maria. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so.
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, and so we would have to go back and maybe recalculate that just to make sure that we have not included some additional eligible city-related only fees.
That number would be 2.7 million. That's the number with the two categories of Free City and EFO1, 2.9.
Okay, it looks like Rebecca has her hand up. Did you have your hand up too, Elisa?
Yeah, what I would just wanted to clarify that dual enrollment students do not have any fees at all.
Right, and I think the reference is that we absorb those as a college. So is there a way to express that in a cost to the college and say, this is what it costs to support dual enrollment for students in San Francisco?
I see, okay.
Okay, Elisa?
I want to mark that I think we've said that we're going to have, we've said that we're going to have more conversation about dual enrollment. Is that true, or am I misremembering? It feels like every time we talk about dual enrollment, I get more confused. Because I would have thought that, right, dual enrollment San Francisco students are San Francisco students. So I guess I'd like to understand more about that if it isn't something we've already requested. That just sounds like a lot of obstacles. But the real thing I wanted to take a moment to sort of ask about or notice is, while there are outstanding debt, we're really talking about outstanding debt more than we're talking about fees. When we say fees, these are students who enrolled, left, didn't get something paid for whatever reason, and they only really discover often that there's a problem. Actually, this happened to me a couple of years ago. They only really discover that they didn't get something taken care of when they go to enroll again. So I just want people to sort of have in their head what it's like to say, I'm going back to college. This is it. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to give it another try. And to discover with all that oomph that comes with trying to decide to enroll again, and by the way, trying to get through our incredibly challenging enrollment system, but all that oomph that gets you over there, and you go to enroll and you sign up, and then suddenly you just get this sort of not very communicative error message that says you can't because there's some kind of problem. And so what we're talking about doing here is removing that obstacle so that Free City students who have this outstanding debt will not run into this brick wall, this sort of impassable brick wall that totally takes all the momentum out of that moment when they're re-enrolling in college. So I think that that's something that we've been talking about for many years now. I'm really glad that we're talking about it more and getting a sense of how many. And I also just want to ask us if we can imagine a Free City program that doesn't set itself up to create this obstacle for our Free City students at any point, right? There's a way to set up this program where you're not creating this, so that you're saying, even if a student doesn't make it the first time, we're not going to ask them to pay it back. We're going to ask them to come back to college and try again. And I think that would be a really good way to think about what we're trying to do with this. And I'd be interested, also to hear from the RP group. We don't really know, but like to see some of those gaps and folks who are not persisting despite Free City, and how some of our students, some of our equity populations have a lot more gap there. I wonder if this has anything to do with it. So, okay, thanks.
Okay, Student Trustee Villalobos.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As far as so we're talking about Free City, and we're talking about how we're accumulating fees and debt for students and the barriers it creates. Just to put it into context, when a recipient of Free City College student on a regular basis, if you're a recipient, you end up paying about $29 per semester that Free City does not cover, aside from lab fees or material fees. And it could get pricey depending on what kind of program you're in. But as far as the enrolling in classes and then dropping the classes after deadline, that's where the core of the debt is at. For instance, some regular classes that started at the beginning of the semester, you have 2 weeks to try out a class, and you have to drop within those 2 weeks if you're not planning to stay in the class. Anytime after that, you accumulate debt by whatever the class or the units it holds. And to make things worse, we have late start classes, which is a good thing, but some of these late start classes, and I shared this with the board of trustees recently, is that some of these courses, you have 1 to 2 days to drop a class within the time frame that it starts. So for instance, we have classes that are starting this next week, September 26th, I believe. If you don't drop it in September 28th, you accumulate the debt for enrolling those classes that you haven't even attended yet. So that comes very problematic in the sense that we already have barriers within our college, whether it be registration or the lack of classes overall. But this creates a barrier in the sense that we can't even get to the registration system or see what classes are offered or not offered, in this case, to be able to continue. And so day in and day out, myself and other student leaders and representatives have actually hands-on dealt with students that can't even get past the hold barrier because of the depth. And it's not depth that has been accumulated recently, because the student would know if they dropped a class yesterday or earlier this semester. It's depth that, Dr. Lisa Cooper Wilkins mentioned. It's at the start of the pandemic or before the pandemic. But now that December came along and now we're into a new year, now all this comes into the light, and it affects students. And it's either one thing or another is going to happen. It's either students are going to have to provide those funds in order to continue to the next step of registration, or we're going to miss out on that student. And for the equity student population, the later route is very evident, and we see it day in and day out. So I did wanted to share that with you all, and something put in place like a student debt wipeout has been very beneficial, at least for the potential 700 students that have benefited. It's not all students. Hopefully in the future, or in the near future, we have something where we don't accumulate that debt because of a dropping of a class for whatever reason.
Thank you. Connie Ford, did you have a comment?
I just had, a comment and maybe a goal for us. This has been a long-standing item that's been on our agenda off and on for at least a year or two. And I'm thinking that maybe we could possibly set a goal for accomplishing this in the broadest sense that we can, given the considerations of who's qualified and who's not, but all local San Francisco Free City College students, and as a goal for having it up and running before next semester, so that we could, as a way of encouraging everybody in San Francisco to apply for our program in City College, we could advertise that or something, get out the word that, as Elisa said, the problem with our computer system and applying is difficult enough, and that they will not be dinged for outstanding fees, past outstanding fees. So just if we could put that in our mindset and have a couple of more meetings before, whenever we have to have it, before November, before December, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Perfect timing for future agenda items. Joanna, did you want to close out with a comment?
Sure, I just wanted to echo some of the last comments, because our dual enrollment students go through some of the same barriers. And once and we're helping them with, like, they can't register because of fees, and we pay their fees for them because several of them cannot afford to pay the fees as high school students. And I feel like that is the first impression they get of City College is some of these barriers. And if we were able to address them, I would hope that their enrollment after they graduate from us would increase at City College.
Okay, so I think that would be a future agenda item, so that we can take care of this, and maybe, Jay, we can create a meeting sooner rather than later.
We're taking notes, and we'll keep this on the agenda for the next meeting. And then we'll be working after this to kind of schedule the next one. We'll just try to see if we can do that as soon as possible.
I do want to add to that, because I think part of the problem, like, I didn't even know I had a debt. And then when I went to go to take another class, that's when I found out I had the debt. I didn't even know that I had it there. Is there any way that we're even notifying people about it, or that they even know that there's the specter of that? I could actually take care of it, but I know that for a student, it would be really, really difficult. Maria Sue?
Thank you. I also want to echo Alyssa's thanks to Connie for constantly keeping us on target. Thank you. And I also want to echo that I agree for us to meet sooner rather than later, so that we can settle this, so that we can start the next cycle of enrollment with as many students as possible. So we will do whatever it takes on our side to try to schedule the next meeting. I just ask the rest of our body here to also be flexible and keep your schedule open. It's quite hard. Yes, President Tabla. It's quite hard to schedule you all. So that's one. Number two, what we heard from the RP report was that, and what was referenced earlier was that sometimes that first interaction that students have with you all, with the college, has been difficult, and that's through that portal, the enrollment portal. And we've heard about how technology has been an issue. So I wonder if there's also something else there for us to think about in terms of maybe supporting and bolstering the college so that we can make enrollment of students easier, so that we don't have to spend so much energy to just help a young person enroll to the college. So there are these two things that's floating in my head, and I would propose that we spend some time thinking about them.
Yes, and on the next agenda, I think that's a great idea. It looks like Mondays might be good for a lot of us that are here. So maybe keeping that in mind too. Is there anything else, any public comment?
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
No speakers in the queue.
Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Okay, then our final item is adjournment. And noted for the record, this meeting is now adjourned at 4:59. So we're only 4 minutes over.